In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every wind and shadows conceal deadly threats, 8 elite Navy SEALs found themselves in a nightmare that would test every ounce of their training. What started as a routine reconnaissance mission turned into a desperate fight for survival when enemy forces surrounded them in a kill zone with no escape route. As bullets rained down and hope seemed lost, something impossible happened. Through the chaos of gunfire and exploding mortars, a figure emerged from the storm clouds above. Not an angel, but something far more deadly and precise. She carried death in her hands and salvation in her heart, and her arrival would change everything these warriors thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the thin line between life and death in the world's most dangerous places. The helicopter's rotors cut through the thin mountain air as 8 Navy SEALs prepared for what their briefing officer had called a simple reconnaissance mission. Team leader Marcus Rodriguez checked his gear one final time, running through the mental checklist that had kept him alive through 3 deployments. The mission seemed straightforward enough. Infiltrate a suspected Taliban weapons cache in the remote Kunar province, gather intelligence, and extract before dawn. Nothing they hadn't done dozens of times before. The team consisted of some of the most experienced operators in Navy. Rodriguez had earned his reputation leading dangerous missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. His second-in-command, Jake Thompson, was a demolitions expert who could turn a paperclip into an explosive device. Danny Williams served as their communication specialist, while Mike Shin handled medical duties. The remaining 4 operators, Alex Parker, Tom Mitchell, Ryan Davis, and Kevin Walsh, rounded out one of the most effective SEAL teams in the region. As their helicopter approached the insertion point, Rodriguez studied the terrain below through his night vision goggles. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the star-filled sky, their peaks shrouded in shifting clouds that promised a storm before morning. Deep valleys carved by ancient rivers created a maze of hiding spots and potential ambush points. The intelligence reports had indicated minimal enemy presence in the area, but Rodriguez had learned to trust his instincts more than paperwork. 2 minutes to insertion. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. The team performed final equipment checks with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Each man carried enough ammunition, water, and supplies for a 12-hour operation. Their target lay 8 kilometers from the landing zone, a trek through some of the most treacherous terrain in Afghanistan. The helicopter touched down on a rocky outcrop barely large enough for its landing skids. The SEALs flowed out of the aircraft like shadows, immediately establishing a defensive perimeter while their ride disappeared into the darkness. Within seconds, the mountains swallowed the sound of rotors, leaving only the whisper of wind through rocks and the distant call of night birds. Rodriguez gathered his team with hand signals, their faces painted with camouflage that made them nearly invisible in the moonlight. Using his GPS, he confirmed their position and plotted the route to their objective. The path would take them through a series of ridgelines and valleys, staying away from known trails where they might encounter enemy patrols or improvised explosive devices. The team moved with the fluid coordination that came from years of training and combat experience. Thompson took point, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, while Rodriguez maintained overall tactical command from the center of the formation. Williams monitored radio frequencies for any signs that their presence had been detected, while Chun watched their rear approach. The first 2 hours of movement passed without incident. They navigated steep rocky slopes and narrow passes with the sure-footedness of mountain goats. The team communicated through subtle hand signals and brief whispered comments when necessary. Their night vision equipment turned the dark landscape into a green-tinted world where every detail stood out with crystal clarity. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew thinner and colder. A light wind carried the scent of snow from the higher peaks, confirming the weather reports that had predicted a possible storm system moving through the area. Rodriguez monitored the darkening clouds with growing concern. Bad weather could complicate their extraction, but It might also provide additional concealment for their approach to the target. The intelligence package for their mission had been unusually detailed. Satellite images showed a compound built into a natural cave system near the peak of a mountain designated Hill 2847 on their maps. The facility allegedly housed a significant cache of weapons and explosives that Taliban forces were using to supply attacks on coalition forces throughout the region. Their job was to gather photographic evidence, assess the size and nature of the weapon stockpile, and determine the best approach for a future direct action mission to destroy the site. What the intelligence reports hadn't mentioned was the sophisticated early warning system the Taliban had established throughout the area. Hidden observation posts on key ridge lines allowed enemy forces to track movement across vast stretches of terrain. Advanced communication networks enabled rapid coordination between multiple enemy units. Most concerning of all, the weapons cache was protected by a much larger force than intelligence estimates had suggested. As the SEAL team approached their final approach route to the target, they began to notice signs that troubled Rodriguez's experienced eye. Fresh tire tracks in a dried riverbed suggested recent vehicle traffic. Cigarette butts and food wrappers indicated enemy personnel had used specific locations as observation posts within the past few days. Most alarming were the carefully placed rocks and branches that appeared natural but could serve as markers for hidden explosive devices. Thompson raised his fist, bringing the team to an immediate halt. Through his night vision scope, he had spotted something that made his blood run cold. On the ridgeline above their planned route, the faint outline of a human figure was barely visible against the sky. The figure remained motionless for several minutes before disappearing behind a cluster of rocks. Rodriguez moved forward to Thompson's position and studied the area through his own optics. The ridgeline appeared empty now, but both men had enough combat experience to trust what they had seen. They were being watched, which meant their mission had already been compromised before they reached their objective. Using hand signals, Rodriguez directed his team to take cover in a cluster of large boulders while he considered their options. They could abort the mission and call for extraction, but that would mean losing valuable intelligence and allowing the weapons cache to remain operational. They could continue with their original plan, but with the knowledge that enemy forces were aware of their presence. Or they could adapt their approach to account for the new threat situation. Williams monitored enemy radio frequencies and detected increased chatter in the local area. While he couldn't understand the specific words, the tone and frequency of transmissions suggested heightened alert status among Taliban forces. The pattern indicated that multiple enemy units were coordinating some type of operation, possibly in response to the SEAL team's infiltration. Chun conducted a quick medical assessment of the team and confirmed that everyone remained in good health despite the challenging movement through high-altitude terrain. The team's physical conditioning and acclimatization training had prepared them for operations in this environment, but the thin air and cold temperatures still presented physiological challenges that could affect their performance. Rodriguez made the decision to continue with the mission, but modify their approach route to avoid the area where they had been observed. This would require additional movement time and expose them to different risks, but it offered the best chance of reaching their objective while maintaining tactical surprise. The team leader's experience told him that success often depended on adapting to unexpected developments rather than rigidly following predetermined plans. The modified route took them through a deep ravine that provided excellent concealment, but channeled their movement in a predictable direction. Rodriguez was acutely aware that this terrain feature could easily become a trap if enemy forces positioned themselves on the high ground surrounding the ravine. However, alternative routes would require crossing open areas where they would be exposed to observation and potential sniper fire. As they moved through the ravine, the team maintained heightened awareness of their surroundings. Every shadow could conceal an enemy position. Every sound might indicate an approaching threat. The psychological pressure of operating in hostile territory, where discovery could mean death, required mental discipline that years of training had developed in each team member. The weather began to deteriorate as predicted, with increasing wind and the first drops of cold rain that would soon turn to snow at their altitude. While the storm would provide additional concealment, it would also reduce visibility and make movement more difficult. Rodriguez calculated that they had perhaps 2 hours before weather conditions would force them to seek shelter or risk exposure injuries. Parker, monitoring their rear security, detected movement on the ridgeline they had crossed an hour earlier. Through his night vision scope, he counted at least 6 figures following their general route of movement. The pursuers maintained tactical spacing and moved with the discipline of trained fighters rather than local civilians. This confirmed that enemy forces were actively hunting the SEAL team. The realization that they were being pursued added new urgency to their mission. Rodriguez faced a difficult decision: press forward to complete their intelligence gathering despite the increased risk, or begin immediate evasion and extraction procedures to avoid potential capture or elimination. The intelligence value of their target weighed against the safety of his team members in a calculation that every special operations leader faced in combat. Williams received a scheduled communication check from their Tactical Operations Center, confirming that extraction helicopters remained on standby and ready to respond if needed. However, the deteriorating weather was already affecting flight operations, and the window for helicopter extraction was rapidly closing. This added another layer of complexity to their tactical situation. As they approached the final kilometer to their objective, the team encountered increasing signs of enemy presence. Fresh footprints in soft soil, recently used fighting positions, and communication wire running between concealed locations all indicated that the area around the weapons cache was heavily defended. The intelligence estimates of minimal security had been dangerously inaccurate. Rodriguez gathered his team for a final briefing before approaching their target. Speaking in whispers barely audible above the wind, he outlined their options and sought input from his experienced subordinates. The consensus was clear: they had come too far to abort the mission now, despite the obvious risks. The intelligence they could gather might save the lives of coalition forces who would face these weapons in future engagements. The final approach to Hill 2847 required crossing an open area approximately 200 meters wide. This stretch of exposed terrain represented the most dangerous part of their entire mission. Once they committed to crossing this area, there would be no turning back if they encountered enemy forces. The team would either complete their mission or fight their way out of what could easily become a carefully prepared kill zone. As Rodriguez prepared to lead his team across this final obstacle, none of them could have imagined that their routine reconnaissance mission was about to transform into a desperate battle for survival that would test every skill they had learned and every bond of brotherhood they had forged through years of service together. The open ground stretched before them like a moonlit killing field, every rock and depression potentially concealing death. Rodriguez studied the terrain through his night vision scope for the third time, searching for any sign of enemy positions or improvised explosive devices. The area appeared clear, but his combat instinct screamed warnings that something was terribly wrong. Thompson moved to Rodriguez's side, his demolitions training making him particularly sensitive to signs of prepared explosive traps. The ground showed subtle disturbances that could indicate buried devices, but they might also be natural variations in the rocky soil. Without time for a detailed reconnaissance, they would have to trust their luck and tactical spacing to minimize casualties if they triggered any hidden surprises. Williams monitored enemy communications and reported increasing radio traffic from multiple directions around their position. The electronic signatures suggested that Taliban forces were coordinating a complex operation involving at least 3 separate units. The pattern of transmissions indicated a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded their intelligence estimates of local enemy capabilities. As the team prepared to cross the exposed area, Chun distributed additional medical supplies among the team members. Combat experience had taught them that wounds were most likely during movement through dangerous terrain, and having medical equipment distributed throughout the team ensured that treatment could begin immediately regardless of who was injured. Rodriguez made the decision to cross the open ground in two elements, with half the team providing overwatch while the other half moved. This would reduce the risk of losing the entire team to a single ambush or explosive device, while maintaining enough firepower to suppress enemy positions if they were discovered during the crossing. The first element consisted of Rodriguez, Thompson, Parker, and Walsh. They would cross first while Williams, Chun, Davis, and Mitchell provided covering fire from concealed positions. Once the first group reached the far side safely, they would establish overwatch positions while the second element made their crossing. Thompson took point for the crossing, his experience with explosive devices making him the best choice to detect potential threats during movement. Rodriguez followed at a 20-meter interval, with Parker and Walsh maintaining tactical spacing behind him. Their night vision equipment revealed every detail of the rocky terrain, but couldn't penetrate below the surface where buried explosives might wait. The first 50 meters of crossing passed without incident. Thompson moved with the cautious precision of a man who understood that each step could be his last, testing the ground ahead with his rifle before committing his full weight to each footfall. The team maintained communication through subtle hand signals and brief radio whispers when necessary. Rodriguez felt the familiar combination of fear and anticipation that accompanied high-risk operations. His mind automatically calculated distances to potential cover positions, assessed likely enemy firing positions, and planned immediate action drills if they came under attack. Years of combat experience had programmed these calculations to run continuously in the background of his conscious thoughts. At the halfway point across the exposed area, Thompson suddenly froze and raised his fist in the universal military signal to halt. Through his night vision scope, he had detected movement in the rocks ahead, just at the edge of their visual range. The movement was subtle but deliberate, suggesting a human presence rather than wildlife. Rodriguez moved forward to Thompson's position and studied the suspected threat area. For several long minutes, they observed the rocks without detecting further movement. The wind had increased significantly, creating natural motion among loose vegetation that could easily be mistaken for enemy activity. However, both men had enough experience to distinguish between natural and human-generated movement patterns. Williams, monitoring from the overwatch position, detected a sudden spike in enemy radio transmissions. The volume and urgency of communication suggested that Taliban forces were preparing to initiate some type of operation. The timing correlation between increased radio activity and the suspected movement ahead strongly indicated that the SEAL team had been detected. Chin used his medical training to monitor the team's physiological status during the high-stress situation. Elevated heart rates and rapid breathing patterns were normal responses to potential combat, but he watched for signs that stress levels might compromise their tactical effectiveness. The thin mountain air added an additional physiological burden that could affect their performance. The decision point had arrived. Rodriguez could order his team to withdraw immediately and attempt to reach the extraction point before enemy forces could coordinate an effective response. Alternatively, they could continue forward with the knowledge that they were probably walking into a carefully prepared ambush. The intelligence value of their mission had to be weighed against the lives of 8 elite operators. Through his radio earpiece, Rodriguez heard Williams report multiple enemy units converging on their location from 3 different directions. The electronic intelligence painted a picture of at least 30 enemy fighters moving to surround the SEAL team's position. The Taliban had clearly been waiting for coalition forces to approach this target, turning their weapons cache into bait for a much larger trap. Thompson detected the faint outline of a rifle barrel protruding from the rocks ahead. The weapon was positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire with other hidden positions, indicating a sophisticated defensive plan rather than a chance encounter with a lone sentry. The Taliban had prepared this killing zone with careful attention to tactical details that would maximize casualties among attacking forces. Rodriguez made the critical decision to continue forward despite the obvious risks. Withdrawing now would mean abandoning their mission without gathering any intelligence about the weapon's cache, and it would likely result in a running firefight against superior numbers across difficult terrain. Moving forward offered the possibility of completing their mission while maintaining the initiative in any subsequent engagement. The team leader signaled for Thompson to continue the advance, but with modified tactical procedures that would make them less predictable to waiting enemies. Instead of following the most direct route, they would approach the suspected enemy positions from an unexpected angle that might allow them to gain tactical surprise despite being detected. As they adjusted their approach route, the weather continued to deteriorate rapidly. Snow began falling in earnest, reducing visibility and creating a layer of white that would make their dark uniforms stand out against the lighter background. The storm that had promised concealment was now working against them, while also grounding any possibility of close air support or emergency extraction. Parker, maintaining rear security for the advancing element, spotted muzzle flashes on the ridgeline behind their position. The Overwatch team was under attack, with enemy forces attempting to cut off their retreat route, while other units prepared to engage the advancing element from prepared positions ahead. The Taliban trap was springing exactly as planned, with the SEAL team caught in the middle of a carefully coordinated ambush. Williams transmitted a brief contact report before his position came under heavy automatic weapons fire. The volume of incoming rounds indicated that enemy forces significantly outnumbered the four-man Overwatch team, and their tactical situation was rapidly becoming untenable. The distinctive sound of AK-47 rifles mixed with the deeper reports of machine guns and the occasional crack of sniper fire. Rodriguez realized that his team faced a tactical nightmare scenario. Enemy forces had achieved tactical surprise despite the SEALs' superior training and equipment. The Taliban had turned the isolated location and difficult terrain to their advantage, creating a situation where the SEAL team's technological advantages were minimized while their numerical disadvantage was maximized. Thompson reached the edge of the suspected enemy position and confirmed Rodriguez's worst fears. The rocks ahead concealed a well-prepared fighting position with multiple rifle positions and pre-planned fields of fire. Ammunition caches and communication equipment indicated that this was not a hastily prepared ambush, but a carefully constructed defensive position designed to destroy attacking forces. The sound of gunfire from the Overwatch position intensified, with a rapid cyclic rate of automatic weapons, suggesting that enemy forces were attempting to overwhelm Williams' team through superior firepower. Rodriguez could hear the distinctive reports of American weapons returning fire, but the volume differential indicated that his men were badly outnumbered and running low on ammunition. Chen's voice came through the radio with the calm professionalism that characterized special operations medical personnel under fire. One of the Overwatch team had been wounded by enemy fire, requiring immediate medical attention that Chen couldn't provide from their current position. The casualty report added medical emergency to their growing list of tactical problems. As snow continued to fall more heavily, Rodriguez faced the most difficult decision of his military career. His team was outnumbered, surrounded, and running low on ammunition while operating in terrain that favored the enemy. Conventional military doctrine called for immediate withdrawal to avoid destruction, but withdrawal routes were already compromised by enemy forces. The Taliban fighters demonstrated tactical discipline that exceeded intelligence estimates of their capabilities. Instead of rushing forward to overwhelm the isolated SEAL team, they maintained their positions and continued to direct accurate fire that pinned down the Americans while additional enemy units moved into blocking positions. This level of tactical coordination suggested extensive training and combat experience. Walsh detected movement on their left flank as additional enemy forces attempted to complete the encirclement. The Taliban were executing a classic pincer movement designed to trap the SEAL team in a kill zone with no escape routes. The rocky terrain that had provided concealment during their approach was now working against them by limiting their options for movement and tactical maneuver. Rodriguez attempted to establish communication with their Tactical Operations Center to request immediate air support and emergency extraction. However, the combination of mountain terrain, storm conditions, and enemy jamming equipment made reliable communication impossible. The team was effectively cut off from outside assistance and would have to fight their way out using only their organic weapons and ammunition. The first enemy grenades began impacting around their position, with the explosions sending rock fragments flying through the air like deadly shrapnel. The Taliban were using the grenades to flush the Americans out of their covered positions and into the open where they could be engaged more effectively by rifle and machine gun fire. Thompson identified what appeared to be the enemy command position based on the pattern of radio antennas and the tactical positioning relative to the surrounding fighting positions. Eliminating the enemy commander might disrupt their coordination enough to create opportunities for the SEAL team to break contact and escape the kill zone. As the intensity of enemy fire increased, Rodriguez realized that his team's situation had deteriorated beyond the point where conventional tactics could ensure their survival. They needed something unexpected, some factor that could change the tactical balance in their favor. Unfortunately, in the remote mountains of Afghanistan, surrounded by superior numbers of well-trained enemies, such salvation seemed impossible to imagine. The storm clouds above them continued to thicken and darken, promising even worse weather conditions that would ground all aircraft and eliminate any possibility of external assistance. As the situation became increasingly desperate, none of the trapped SEALs could have predicted that those same storm clouds concealed an asset that would soon change everything about their tactical situation in ways they never could have imagined. The gunfire had settled into the deadly rhythm of a sustained engagement, with enemy forces maintaining steady pressure while conserving ammunition for a final assault. Rodriguez counted at least 6 different enemy firing positions based on muzzle flash locations and the sound patterns of various weapons. His tactical situation assessment painted a grim picture. 8 men surrounded by 30 or more enemies in terrain that offered minimal cover and no clear escape routes. Williams had managed to establish a defensive position behind a cluster of boulders with the remainder of his Overwatch team, but their ammunition situation was becoming critical. Davis had sustained a through bullet wound to his left shoulder that was bleeding steadily despite Chen's remote medical guidance. The wound wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it effectively reduced their fighting strength and would require proper medical attention within hours. Thompson studied the enemy positions through his rifle scope, noting the professional spacing and tactical discipline that characterized experienced fighters rather than untrained militia. The Taliban had clearly invested significant resources in training and equipping this unit, suggesting that the weapons cache they were protecting contained materials of exceptional value or strategic importance. The weather continued to deteriorate, with heavy snow now falling steadily and wind speeds increasing to dangerous levels. Visibility had dropped to less than 100 meters, creating a double-edged situation that provided concealment for both American and enemy forces while making accurate shooting more difficult for everyone involved in the engagement. Rodriguez attempted to use the degraded visibility to reposition his team toward better defensive positions, but enemy forces had established observation posts that covered all potential movement routes. Every time one of his men attempted to move, accurate sniper fire forced them back into their current positions. The Taliban had clearly studied this terrain extensively and prepared for exactly this type of engagement. Parker monitored their ammunition situation with the careful attention of a professional soldier who understood that running out of bullets meant death or capture. Each team member carried approximately 210 rounds of rifle ammunition plus additional rounds for their sidearms, but sustained combat was consuming their supplies faster than anticipated. At their current rate of fire, they would be down to final magazines within 2 hours. Chen's medical assessment of the team revealed the cumulative effects of high-altitude operations, cold weather exposure, and combat stress. While none of the men showed immediate signs of altitude sickness or hypothermia, Their physical performance was gradually declining in ways that could affect their shooting accuracy and tactical decision-making abilities. The enemy commander demonstrated tactical patience that surprised Rodriguez with its sophistication. Instead of launching immediate human wave attacks that would result in high Taliban casualties, the enemy leader was content to maintain the siege while his forces gradually tightened the encirclement. This approach would eventually force the Americans to surrender their position or die from exposure and ammunition exhaustion. Williams detected electronic jamming signals that were interfering with their radio communications and GPS navigation systems. The Taliban possessed more advanced electronic warfare capabilities than intelligence reports had indicated, suggesting possible assistance from foreign advisors or access to sophisticated military equipment through black market channels. As the siege continued into its third hour, Rodriguez began to consider options that he had hoped never to contemplate. Breaking out of the encirclement would require sacrificing some team members to create opportunities for others to escape. Surrendering was not a viable option given Taliban treatment of captured American soldiers. Fighting to the last man was the most likely outcome unless something changed dramatically in their tactical situation. Thompson identified a possible weak point in the enemy encirclement where the terrain forced Taliban positions to be spaced farther apart than ideal. A coordinated assault on this position might create a temporary gap through which the team could escape, but it would require exposing themselves to devastating crossfire from multiple directions during the breakout attempt. The psychological pressure of sustained combat in an apparently hopeless situation began to affect even these experienced operators. Rodriguez noticed subtle changes in his men's behavior patterns that indicated increasing stress levels. Maintaining unit cohesion and fighting effectiveness would require careful leadership attention to prevent the gradual degradation that could turn a difficult situation into a complete disaster. Walsh detected increased enemy activity on their right flank, with Taliban fighters moving additional weapons into position for what appeared to be preparation for a final assault. The enemy commander had apparently decided that weather conditions and American ammunition shortages created favorable conditions for eliminating the trapped SEAL team through direct attack rather than continued siege warfare. Chun provided medical updates on Davis's condition, reporting that the wounded operator remained combat effective despite significant blood loss. However, the combination of injury, cold exposure, and high altitude was gradually weakening his physical condition in ways that would eventually require evacuation to proper medical facilities for treatment and recovery. The sound pattern of enemy weapons fire changed subtly, indicating that Taliban forces were repositioning for different tactical objectives. Rodriguez's experience allowed him to interpret these audio cues as signs of preparation for coordinated assault rather than continued suppressive fire. The enemy was preparing to end the standoff through direct action. Parker reported sighting enemy personnel carrying what appeared to be heavy weapons toward positions that would provide direct fire support for assaulting forces. The Taliban were bringing additional firepower to bear, including possible mortars or recoilless rifles that could destroy American defensive positions through indirect fire rather than exposing their personnel to return fire. Williams managed to establish brief communication contact with their Tactical Operations Center, confirming that weather conditions had grounded all aircraft and made ground-based rescue operations impossible. The team was effectively isolated until weather conditions improved, which meteorological reports suggested would not occur for at least 12 hours. Rodriguez made the difficult decision to begin preparation for a fighting withdrawal toward terrain that might offer better defensive possibilities. The plan would require abandoning their mission objective and accepting heavy casualties during movement across open ground under enemy observation, but remaining in their current position guaranteed eventual destruction. Thompson conducted a detailed reconnaissance of potential withdrawal routes, identifying a series of rock formations approximately 400 meters away that might provide better cover and concealment. However, reaching those positions would require crossing terrain that enemy forces could easily sweep with machine gun and rifle fire from multiple directions simultaneously. The tactical situation deteriorated further when enemy mortar rounds began impacting around the American positions. The Taliban had brought indirect fire weapons into play, allowing them to attack the SEAL team without exposing their own personnel to return fire. Mortar fire would eventually destroy their defensive positions through sustained bombardment. Shin reported that the cold weather was beginning to affect weapon systems reliability, with several team members experiencing feeding problems with their rifles due to moisture condensation and temperature extremes. Maintaining their weapons in combat-ready condition required constant attention that diverted focus from other tactical priorities. As enemy mortar fire increased in accuracy and intensity, Rodriguez realized that his team faced imminent destruction unless they could somehow change the tactical balance. The Taliban had overwhelming numerical superiority, better knowledge of local terrain, weather conditions that prevented American air support, and indirect fire weapons that could destroy defensive positions systematically. Walsh detected enemy infantry beginning to advance under cover of the mortar barrage, indicating that the final assault was commencing. Taliban forces were using classic combined arms tactics that coordinated indirect fire support with infantry movement to overwhelm defensive positions. The SEAL team would soon face close-quarters combat against overwhelming odds. The storm above them had intensified to near-blizzard conditions, with snow falling so heavily that visibility dropped to less than 50 meters. Wind speeds had increased to levels that made accurate shooting extremely difficult and created wind chill factors that threatened hypothermia exposure for personnel without adequate cold weather protection. Rodriguez attempted one final communication with higher headquarters, requesting immediate emergency extraction despite weather conditions that made such operations extremely dangerous. However, static and jamming interference made reliable communication impossible, leaving the team completely isolated and dependent on their organic capabilities for survival. Thompson identified enemy snipers moving into position to provide overwatch fire for the advancing infantry assault. The Taliban were executing a well-coordinated attack plan that demonstrated extensive preparation and training for this specific tactical scenario. Their level of military professionalism exceeded all previous intelligence estimates. As mortar rounds impacted closer to their positions with increasing accuracy, Rodriguez prepared his team for what would likely be their final engagement. Each man understood the tactical situation and accepted the probability that they would not survive the next hour. However, their training and professional ethos demanded that they exact the highest possible price from enemy forces. Parker distributed the last of their ammunition among team members, ensuring that each man had enough rounds for the coming close-quarters battle. The mathematics of their situation were stark. 8 men with limited ammunition against 30-plus enemies with unlimited supplies and indirect fire support in terrain that favored the attacking force. Williams made one final attempt to establish communication with any friendly forces in the area, broadcasting emergency codes that would indicate their desperate situation to any coalition units within radio range. However, the remote location and severe weather conditions made it unlikely that anyone could receive their transmission or provide assistance. As Taliban infantry moved closer under cover of the continuing mortar barrage, Rodriguez prepared to give the order for their final defensive stand. None of them could have imagined that salvation was about to arrive from an impossible direction, carried on wings of storm clouds, and delivered with the precision of a master craftsman who had spent years perfecting the art of death at long range. Elena monitored the tactical situation through her scope as Taliban forces continued their withdrawal from advanced positions around the trapped Americans. Her intervention had broken the siege, but she understood that enemy forces would regroup and attempt to locate her position for counterattack. The window of opportunity for extraction was narrow and closing rapidly as weather conditions began to improve. Rodriguez coordinated with his team to execute a tactical withdrawal toward better defensive positions while their unknown protector continued providing overwatch fire. The precision shots that had saved their lives demonstrated marksmanship skills that exceeded anything in his extensive combat experience, suggesting military training at the highest classification levels. Williams managed to establish brief communication contact with their Tactical Operations Center, reporting that friendly sniper fire had broken the enemy's siege and created opportunities for movement toward extraction points. However, he could provide no information about the identity or origin of their mysterious benefactor, whose position remained unknown despite intensive observation efforts. Elena calculated ammunition remaining in her supply and determined that she could maintain effective fire support for approximately 30 additional minutes before reaching minimum reserves required for her own extraction and survival. Every shot had to serve multiple tactical purposes, eliminating immediate threats, disrupting enemy coordination, and creating psychological pressure that would discourage renewed assault attempts. Thompson led the team's movement toward a series of rock formations that offered better defensive positions and multiple routes for potential helicopter extraction when weather conditions permitted flight operations. The unknown snipers' continued overwatch fire eliminated enemy threats that would otherwise have made such movement impossible under hostile observation. Chen provided medical updates, confirming that Davis remained stable despite his shoulder wound, and could continue combat operations with modified duties that accommodated his physical limitations. The improved tactical situation allowed proper medical attention that would have been impossible under the previous siege conditions created by Taliban encirclement. Elena detected enemy attempts to coordinate counter-sniper operations using remaining personnel in concealed positions around the battle area. However, her advanced training in camouflage and fieldcraft made her position nearly impossible to locate, even when enemy forces knew the general direction of her fire. Years of mountain warfare training had prepared her for exactly this type of environment. Rodriguez attempted to establish communication with the unknown sniper using standard military radio frequencies and call signs that might identify friendly forces operating in the area. However, professional operational security protocols would prevent any response that might compromise classified missions or reveal sensitive information about special operations activities. The weather continued to improve gradually, with reduced snowfall and slightly increased visibility that would eventually allow aircraft operations while also making Elena's position more vulnerable to discovery. She monitored meteorological conditions carefully, knowing that changing weather could either facilitate friendly extraction or expose her to enemy counterattack. Parker conducted reconnaissance of potential extraction landing zones within reasonable distance of their current position, identifying several areas that could accommodate helicopter operations when weather conditions permitted flight activities. The unknown sniper's fire support had created tactical opportunities that would have been impossible under continued siege conditions. Elena observed Taliban forces attempting to establish new positions that would provide better observation of American movement while remaining outside effective range of their small arms fire. She systematically engaged these attempts, forcing enemy personnel to remain in covered positions that limited their tactical options and intelligence gathering capabilities. Williams detected electronic intelligence indicating that enemy forces were calling for reinforcements from other Taliban units in the region. The disruption of their assault plan had prompted requests for additional personnel and heavy weapons that could overwhelm both the trapped Americans and their unknown protector through superior firepower and numerical advantage. Rodriguez made the tactical decision to continue movement toward extraction points while weather conditions remained marginal for flight operations, gambling that helicopter pilots would attempt rescue missions despite dangerous flying conditions. The alternative was remaining in hostile territory where enemy reinforcements would eventually overwhelm their defensive capabilities. Elena identified enemy personnel attempting to coordinate indirect fire from mortar positions outside her effective engagement range, requiring her to prioritize targets that posed the greatest immediate threat to the withdrawing Americans. Her tactical training emphasized threat assessment and target prioritization under conditions where ammunition limitations made every shot critical. Thompson established radio contact with inbound rescue helicopters that were attempting to reach the extraction point despite marginal weather conditions and enemy threats in the landing zone area. The pilots reported that they would attempt insertion despite significant risks posed by weather and hostile fire, demonstrating the commitment to recover trapped personnel regardless of personal danger. Chun prepared casualty evacuation procedures for Davis while maintaining readiness to treat additional wounds that might result from movement under enemy observation. The medical situation remained stable, but required continued monitoring as physical stress and environmental conditions could complicate existing injuries or create new medical emergencies. Elena detected enemy reinforcements arriving in the battle area, including personnel with advanced equipment that posed increased threats to both the withdrawing Americans and her own position. The tactical situation was evolving rapidly as Taliban forces adapted their strategy to account for the unexpected sniper threat and the Americans' improved defensive position. Walsh identified suitable defensive positions that would provide cover during helicopter extraction operations while allowing continued tactical movement if weather conditions prevented successful rescue attempts. The team's tactical flexibility remained high despite equipment limitations and casualty status that reduced their overall combat effectiveness. Rodriguez coordinated final withdrawal movements as the sound of approaching helicopters became audible through the storm. The rescue attempt would require precise timing and coordination between ground forces, aircrew, and the unknown sniper whose continued fire support remained critical for mission success during the most vulnerable phase of extraction operations. Elena chambered her final rounds as enemy forces prepared what appeared to be a coordinated assault designed to prevent American extraction and eliminate the sniper threat simultaneously. Her ammunition situation had reached critical levels, requiring perfect shot placement and tactical timing to provide effective support during the most dangerous portion of the rescue operation. The first rescue helicopter approached the landing zone under heavy enemy fire, with Taliban forces directing automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades toward the aircraft, while Elena systematically eliminated the most dangerous threats. Her precision fire created brief windows of reduced enemy pressure that allowed the helicopter to maintain its approach despite devastating hostile fire. Thompson coordinated ground team movement toward the helicopter as Elena's covering fire suppressed enemy positions that could engage the landing aircraft with direct fire weapons. The coordination between unknown sniper and ground forces demonstrated tactical professionalism that suggested extensive training in combined operations despite their inability to establish direct communication. Davis was loaded aboard the first helicopter along with half the team, while Rodriguez coordinated continued resistance that would allow the second aircraft to extract remaining personnel. Elena's fire support remained critical as enemy forces attempted to prevent the second extraction through concentrated attack on both the landing zone and suspected sniper positions. Chun provided medical attention to additional casualties sustained during the extraction operation, while Elena's ammunition reached absolute minimum levels required for her own survival and withdrawal. Her tactical situation had become critical as enemy forces intensified efforts to locate and eliminate the sniper who had disrupted their operation. The second helicopter successfully extracted Rodriguez and the remaining team members as Elena fired her final rounds to suppress enemy attempts at pursuing the departing aircraft. Her intervention had saved 8 American lives and prevented a significant tactical victory for Taliban forces, but her own extraction remained uncertain as weather conditions deteriorated again. Williams managed one final radio transmission as their helicopter departed the landing zone, broadcasting emergency frequencies that might reach the unknown sniper whose sacrifice had made their rescue possible. However, professional operational security protocols prevented any response that might identify classified personnel or compromise ongoing special operations activities. Elena began her own tactical withdrawal from the Overwatch position as enemy forces converged on her suspected location. Years of survival training and mountain warfare experience had prepared her for solo extraction under hostile conditions. But the combination of weather, terrain, and enemy pressure would test every skill she had learned during her military career. Rodriguez looked back toward the mountains as their helicopter flew toward safety, knowing that somewhere in the storm-covered peaks, an unknown warrior was fighting her own battle for survival. The identity of their guardian angel would remain a mystery, classified at levels that prevented acknowledgement of her existence, let alone public recognition of her heroic intervention. 6 months later, Rodriguez received a brief message through unofficial channels that a female soldier had been awarded a classified decoration for actions during a classified operation in Afghanistan. No names were mentioned, no details were provided, but he understood that Elena Vasquez had made it home safely to continue serving her country in shadows where heroes operated without recognition or glory. The weapons cache that had served as bait for the Taliban trap was eventually destroyed by airstrikes, but Rodriguez never forgot the lesson learned during those desperate hours in the mountains. Sometimes salvation arrives from impossible directions, carried by warriors whose names will never appear in history books, but whose courage echoes through the lives they save and the freedoms they protect through sacrifice that remains forever hidden in classified files and grateful memories of those who witnessed their finest hour.